Hello and welcome to Media Lit, where we treat each piece of media like great literature. I'm your host, Randy Elaine. Joining me as always is my friend and co-host, Kris Ingersoll. Kris, how you doing tonight?
So good, Randy. Any night I get to pod with you is a good night.
Likewise, my friend. Now listen, it is double the excitement for me tonight because Kris and I are inviting our first new guest to the show, and it's someone who means the absolute world to me, and that is my cousin, Neil Martin. Neil, say hello.
Hello, Randy. Hello, Kris. And thank you for the honor.
The honor is all mine, Neil. Listen, folks, my cousin Neil is not only a great family member, a great friend, he is also incredibly well read. He's an incredibly fun guy. He is a game master, a trivia expert, and just an all around good time. Neil and I even have a trivia podcast that we've been developing together called Call Our Bluff. So be on the lookout for that.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just an absolute treat to get him to come on and talk about a piece of media with us tonight. Today, we are going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite short stories of all time. This is The Feeling of Power. It's a short story by Isaac Asimov. It first appeared in 1958 in If magazine. During that era of all of these sci-fi magazines that were publishing the speculative short fiction and just all sorts of powerhouses in that world of science fiction writing and other genres really got their start in this world. And this particular story, it's quite short. It's quite simple. You could easily go take 15 minutes of your day and read it right now and come back and join us again. But we're going to be talking quite a bit about technology, how it advances, and how it changes. And I realized that I've got a great little tech story to help my friends Kris and Neil get to know each other a little bit better. I think you guys are down for that.
Oh, yeah.
Most definitely.
Perfect. Now, we live in a world where photographs are so easy to take, they're so easy to store. I know in our home, we have hard drives full of photos that we may never pour through again. It's great that it's easy to take them. But would you agree that you lose track of all these photos you've taken over the years?
Yeah, there are thousands upon thousands of photos and videos in my camera roll, many of which I'll just never see again.
Yeah, have you stumbled into that ever, Neil? Feeling like you can't keep track of all these memories you've recorded?
Yeah, I would say that not only do I have hundreds, if not thousands, of photos on my computer that I've backed up from various cameras and phones, I probably also have a lot of duplicates just from getting lost in the whole process.
Absolutely. And as much as I don't think I'd want to give up my easy access to my photographs, I always think about this simple piece of technology. Neil, there's even a chance you're going to know the item that I'm speaking of.
Okay.
Now, this is predating digital photo frames, etc. My parents had this little photo device that you could load up with probably 20, 25 photographs. It was spring loaded. And it looked like a frame. You can display it on a table. And there was a mechanism that you would pull to pull one photo out of the way, and a spring mechanism would spring the new photo up, and you could cycle through 20 or 25 photos. Now, they never really got updated over the years at my house, and these 20 or 25 photos have all become distinct memories in my brain. And Neil, it just so happens one of the photos in that frame is there to document how much I've always looked up to you, how much I've always respected you. So I'm going to share this photo with you and also with Kris. I'm going to ask Kris to describe it for us. And Neil, I'm also going to be curious if this means anything to you.
All right.
For the listeners at home, after all, podcasting is an audio medium. What I'm looking at is one very tall gentleman and one very, very short gentleman. The thing is, I'm not sure how tall the gentleman is because the short gentleman is actually a child, a very small child by comparison. Looks like somebody's eating maybe a dessert at a family function out of a paper or plastic dish. And there's just the biggest smile that I've ever seen on the face of this small child. Grinning literally ear to ear. There might be a missing tooth. Forgive my old eyes at this hour of the day. But I see one happy kid and a seemingly content older gentleman with him.
Oh my goodness.
Kris, you're 100% right about the missing tooth. I think the joy you see on young Randy's face, it's partially that I'm there hanging out, chatting with my older beloved cousin, and I'm also showing off that freshly missing tooth. I'm still at that point of life where that is an incredible thrill. Uh, Neil, I don't know if you have any recollection of this photo. You may or may not, but even if you don't, you might have some theories about, where or when this might have been taken. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do believe that is my parents' house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, I recognize the drapes on that window. And yeah, this appears to be some sort of family function. So this could have been 4th of July or Christmas Eve. Probably my guess is this was a holiday or a child's birthday, maybe yours. And yeah, the older gentleman, as you so elegantly put it, is really rocking some early or mid 80s fashion and hair there. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna provide any commentary on the fashion at hand. That wasn't my choice to make, but it's dated. I'll say that. It is not of today.
It is most definitely dated. Yes. If I had gone with the pastel shirt and white jacket, I could have opted for Miami Vice at this time. But one word will suffice here, Dockers.
Yeah. Can I guess? Is this Easter, Randy, by any chance?
I truly do not know the answer to this question. I was going to say like the highest probability holiday would be Thanksgiving. Because I know we spent almost every Thanksgiving growing up over at Neil's house. But I can't know for sure. And I've got to say, we can joke about Neil's Dockers all we like, but I've got this very strange teal sweatshirt number going on. And it does not seem to be a hooded sweatshirt, but it has this weirdly like wide collar, yet you would never call it a turtleneck. I'm really not quite sure what it's all about. I don't have a special memory of this shirt beyond this one photo. It's something else. Yeah, so Kris, you're just looking at a really special place where Neil and I and the rest of our family we spent a lot of time together, played a ton of games, played Balderdash, played Pictionary, and it's just kind of the origin story of why I asked him to please join us here today.
What a lovely blast from the past. And I love the tie into the antiquated technology that displayed this in your home for so many years, that spring-loaded multi-photo frame. I think that's really special. And the last time you showed me a photo on a podcast, it was a horrifying corpse. So this is a huge improvement.
Yeah, I thought I'd go a little bit easier on you this time. But yeah, well, as we get into this story, perhaps there is something to be said at times for simplifying technology, because there is not a digital photo that means nearly as much to me as any of the photos in that frame, which is kind of a special and interesting thing.
Oh, thanks, Randy. Appreciate it. Likewise.
Neil, I wanted to ask you first, going into your reading of this short story, did you have any pre-existing relationship with the works of Isaac Asimov or just literary science fiction in general?
Oddly enough, with Asimov, the answer was really no. I hadn't read any of his really famous works, so I have not read the Foundation series. I have not read I, Robot or that series. My only introduction to Asimov probably came back, I want to say like in the early 80s. There was a very short collection of mystery stories that he wrote. It was called The Key Word, and it was actually a children's book. It was sort of in the vein of, I'm going to date myself here, Encyclopedia Brown, where you could read the history. It was just a few pages, and then you would try to figure out what's going on. That was really the only Asimov that I was familiar with. And now, having been introduced to the feeling of power, I am certainly inclined to go back and revisit his work.
Excellent, excellent. Kris, last week we talked about Coyote Ugly. This was something that meant a lot to you. And this week I decided to go with something from a really similar media genre, and I went with a short story from the late 1950s. But Kris, going into this story, did you have any pre-existing relationship with either Isaac Asimov or just literary science fiction in a broader sense?
Yeah, similar to Neil, I didn't really have a pre-existing relationship with Asimov, more than I thought I did. I'll get to that in a second. Other than I had that name in my mind as a giant, right? As a fan of late stage sci-fi television and the movies, Asimov was this giant, this forefather name in my mind, but I had never read any of his works. In preparing for this, I did dig up an old memory because I'm looking back. What has he written? What maybe I read? Are you guys familiar with the story of Nightfall?
I am not.
Nightfall is an Asimov story that deals with a different planet, many suns. It's never nighttime except for once every like 2,000 plus years.
I
And
do know this one.
okay,
I
I've
was
never read
waiting
it.
to hear more.
I've never read it, but I remember a night in college being around a bonfire with some older dudes as a freshman, and this junior guy, Bob. He was enjoying the evening with some, as a podcaster friend of ours likes to say, California legal herb.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and I just remember him sitting back and telling me the whole story. Like, I feel like I have read it. I feel like I could relate it to you because he was like, Nightfall, man. You got to read Nightfall. Um, yeah, and that came back to me as a fairly vivid memory. So I didn't think I had a relationship with Asimov, but the more I reflected, I in fact did.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. This is going to come out in just a minute when Kris digs a little bit deeper into this story with me. But even as someone who is an English teacher by day, has read a lot of sci-fi. My cousin Neil knows that I'm a big fan of the works of one Kurt Vonnegut Jr.
Absolutely.
Uh, when I went to visit Neil in Indianapolis, he asked me what I wanted to do, and I was like, "Do you want to go to the Kurt Vonnegut Memorial Library with me? Because I've been meaning to go." But yeah, Asimov is not an author that I'm deeply, whose works that I'm deeply well read in. Uh, but this one, I really made a special connection with.
Well, I'm excited to hear more about said connection. Let's dig into some of the meat and potatoes of media lit. What is your earliest memory with this story, Randy?
All right, I'm going to be fully honest with you, Kris. I can't pinpoint an exact day or year, but I am fairly certain my first experience with Asimov would have been in the fall of the year 2006. I had recently graduated from college. I was in search of a job and in search of a career. I just barely missed a law change that would have allowed me to have health insurance through my parents until I was 26 years old. However, this did not exist quite yet when I graduated from college. I just missed it by a year or two. And I was scrambling to find a job, any job that would allow me to still have access to medical care, which involved me applying to be a long-term substitute at a high school, not to teach as an English teacher, but just to show up every day, help out, and it was going to come with some of that much needed health insurance. Uh, they did not hire me for that job, but they did need an English teacher on short notice. I was not highly qualified at the time. I did not have a teaching degree, but I had a degree in English and journalism and a certificate in technical writing. And they said, he'll do. So this was 3 days before school started in the fall. So I guess we're technically in the late summer here. And one of the first things I had to teach was a short stories unit to ninth graders. And I started going through the short story compilations. And one of those stories that I had to choose from was The Feeling of Power by Isaac Asimov. And it spoke to me in 2007, and it felt timeless. I could imagine what this might have meant in the Cold War era when it was published. And now in 2024, I can imagine how this ties to a world full of artificial intelligence and a lot of questions there.
Yeah, interesting timing there because you came across this story kind of right at the onset of social media too. Facebook was just ramping up. then, and MySpace was well on its way. Scary time for technological shift. Um, well, if this goes all the way back to 2007 for you and kind of the beginning of your teaching career, how would you say this story has influenced you, your values, your style, or your interests since then?
So I think with this story, you've got this whole question of technology and are we depending on it too much? Which is really interesting to me. What are we losing as technology advances is a really fascinating question. And we're going to talk about that at length today. But I think even more so than that, the thing that really appealed to me in that, post 9/11, Iraq war, Afghanistan war sort of era, was just the sense of humanism underlying this entire story. Because by the time we get to the end, this is really a question of morality and what is a human life worth, even more so than it's about computers. Um, and that's part of why I love my guy Kurt Vonnegut so much. It's partly why I love Asimov so much. Those are both authors who served as presidents of the American Humanists Association at different points in time. And I think that's what takes this good sci-fi story and really makes it personal to me specifically.
Hmm. Well, with that deep personal connection, then can you be objective? You love this story, but does it have any flaws?
Yes. I highly doubt Isaac Asimov would look back at this story and call it his greatest work of all time. It certainly has a vibe and a message, and it gets the job done, but it is quite on the nose. As much as that core of humanism is meaningful to me, the most imaginative end game for this world where the human brain becomes the most powerful computer is the military is hoping they can have manned missiles to launch into enemy forces. um and emotionally it works for me in terms of like sophisticated science fiction. I don't know if that's exactly like top tier. How would you communicate that a life is expendable? Well, I've not read the Foundation series. I know that gets much deeper into the politics and intricacies of how these different governments and forces would interact. So I think Asimov still had a lot in the tank when it came to, can we get into this deeper, more sophisticated science fiction?
He was just sort of scratching the surface of those ideas back in 1958, right? Just sort of beginning to develop them himself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to be asking you folks for some of your flaws as we get a little bit deeper into the story. But before we do that, I thought it'd be fun to ask you both just a couple of questions about our technology use and some other themes that are really valuable here. So, Neil, I'm going to go to you first on this one. And that is, what is the most antiquated piece of technology that you can remember using regularly at some point in your life?
Well, certainly, what we used to call rabbit ears. Definitely old school TVs, frequently in black and white. No remote control, no cable, no internet, just antennas that you would manipulate by hand, often with a great degree of frustration. This is back in the days of snow static. This is in the days of one dial with maybe 13 channels, and usually you'd only get, maybe four or five. You'd have your three major networks at the time. You would have PBS, and then you'd have a couple of syndicated channels, depending on where you lived. For us, it was channels coming out of Boston. So definitely those old school TVs, certainly rotary telephones, and then our grandmother had, I remember this very well, she had one of the very first mobile phones, which was in one of those giant briefcases.
Mm.
It was absolutely enormous. I think this has come across in movies occasionally as a point of kind of retro humor. You just got to cut that idea of this nuclear football sized phone. But yeah, one of the very first really cordless cellular phones.
Absolutely beautiful. Kris, how about for you? What's your most antiquated piece of technology that was once part of your life?
Yeah, really similar to Neil. I thought immediately of TVs and phones. But specifically with the phones, I remember our answering machine, and I remember curating the answering machine greeting. And that to me feels like a whole different world, a world in which we had a little machine that recorded the messages, or otherwise you missed it. And you got to be either really straightforward or really clever with your greeting there. So that was something that we had in our own home. But separate from that, I remember my grandfather, who was a salesman. He sold Cadillacs, Oldsmobile, for a lot of my life. He had a car phone. So not like an early mobile phone, but a fixed to the vehicle, powered by the vehicle car phone. I'm not sure how many of our younger listeners will even know what that really means, if they'll have to look that up to
Mm.
understand what I'm talking about. But I remember thinking that was just the coolest thing in the world back when I was a kid, that my grandfather could drive around and take phone calls, and that I could, of course, play with it when I was in the car.
Yeah, we definitely had a slightly more hip version of the car phone. It was mobile. We were not full briefcase sized, but it was kind of like a fancy like leather calendar size planner with a zipper, with a much larger phone that you could keep in the car. You could also use it from within the house. Now listen, I've got some memories of those rabbit ears as well. Uh, However, what I'm going to go with is something a little bit more unique to me. And this is when I was in junior high school, because I was so cool. I, worked on the yearbook staff. And my art teacher who ran the yearbook staff was very old school. And, our junior high school was starting to get fitted with some more powerful computers, some Macs. There was more editing software out there. But he actually taught me how to lay out the entire yearbook on paper, on like these big pads of layout paper, where I was, physically using a ruler, cutting out photos, laying them out, overlaying them with plastic, getting those proofs ready to send out to the printer. I'm not sure I could step back into the room and recreate the knowledge I had in junior high school, because that's all just become digitized. I can hop on to Canva and do something even more powerful than that now. But yeah, that's my most antiquated moment, I would say.
That's old school, bud. That's old school.
All right. This is in the same vein. And my next question for you folks is, did you ever see a new piece of technology on the horizon and think to yourself, I am never going to use that. It will never be a part of my life, only to realize that you eventually gave in, and it is now, in fact, a part of your life. Kris, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
So the answer is yes and no. So I was really resistant to the idea of wearable technology after the smartphone landed, and then wearable tech came with it, Fitbits, and then Apple Watches, and every other version of that you can imagine. I said, there's no need for that in my life. I don't need that level of connectivity to my tech by any means. And then through my insurance provider, I found out that I could actually just get an iWatch for free. I had to pay like $35 up front. And then as long as I hit certain benchmark fitness goals every month after that, this program would pay for the remainder of the watch cost. I said, sure, I'll give that a go. If it's free, it's for me.
Hmm.
Only thing I turned down is my collar. And so I got it. I wore it for a while. I found value in it. I'm a fitness guy. I found the insights valuable. I was like, okay, I guess I'm an Apple Watch guy now. Wearable tech isn't the devil after all. But then that theory was tested when I shattered it in the gym with a kettlebell. Shattered the watch face. And I have not replaced it since, because I found that I still feel quite strongly that, especially for a given price point, there's no place for that in my life.
Absolutely. Neil, did you ever have this experience of seeing that piece of technology you never thought you would use, but now you use it regularly?
Guess I'll cheat a little bit. Not so much a piece of hardware, but software. And for me, it was LinkedIn. I was really a LinkedIn cynic and very resistant to taking it on, because to me, it just came across as like the new hip thing that a couple of young hotshots had come up with, and it just started to permeate. And therefore, because the few had discovered it, now the many, and eventually the everybody have to use it as well. So yeah, it just felt like a complete redo. Like, I mean, I'm going back to the old days of just paper resumes. And now here's this thing, and you all got to be a part of it, and you got to kind of put your professional life out there, on the internet. So yeah, I was resistant and very cynical, but now I've really come to appreciate it. Not just for sort of the career networking, but also just for the many learning activities. And there's a lot of really good educational modules out there. So yeah, I was reluctant at first, but I've come around.
Absolutely. That's a world I still need to unlock. Perhaps now as a podcast host. Uh, I've been teaching long enough now that my current job I applied for using a manila envelope and postage stamps. So I am that much of a relic. And I haven't quite hit 40 yet either. So I do feel like that's a little bit of a unique experience for someone in my age bracket. But no, my technology thing is just the good old fashioned cell phone. When I was in high school, there were a few kids who had them. It was a pretty huge luxury, and I thought it was not for me. As a teacher these days, one of your challenges is trying to keep teenagers from trying to communicate with their parents all day via cell phone. The fight I had with my parents was I wanted to go out and not have them keep tabs on me. So our disagreement was I don't need to bring the family cell phone out with me, and they insisted that I check in. I did not want a cell phone. I took off to college with some prepaid phone cards, no cell phone in my pocket. And I think the big turning point for me was when I was visiting a friend at Mount Holyoke College, and I missed the last bus back to my dorm, only to find myself locked outdoors without a clear ride home. And I got a cell phone not long after that.
All of a sudden, the use case was pretty apparent to you at that point.
Yeah, and it became more and more quickly apparent to me that it was ridiculous that I ever thought I was going to resist that. But I fought the good fight for at least, you know, 6 months or something. I don't know. All right, folks. Now, another thing that I just want to point out, we are going to poke some fun at the folks in this story today. But if we're going to dish it out, we have to take it. Can you think of something that you rely on in your everyday life that is really, in all honesty, just a total mystery to you? You could never reconstruct it on your own, left to your own devices. Now the flaw with this question is I think if most human beings are being honest with themselves, it's a long list of things you could say here. But Neil, what's one of those items for you? Something that you've like stopped and thought about the fact that you could never just recreate this on your own.
Well, going right back to you saying about the cell phone, I can't imagine a week that goes by without me using the GPS on my phone at some point, even for places that I've already been. I can recall going back a few years to having the dashboard mounted Garmin to rely on, or that taking road trips. I remember, paying trips to AAA to get triptychs printed so that you'd know where you were going. Before that, I remember getting around via the old road atlas. And now I imagine we have, and I don't want to pick on them, but younger listeners who probably have not heard the expression road atlas before. But
Mhm.
basically, this was a portable book of maps of, cities and states that would basically give you an idea where to go. And obviously, to use them, you either needed a passenger or you needed to pull over. But now that GPS, yeah, I have absolutely become dependent on it. Maybe a little bit to my detriment because it's certainly an incentive not to memorize routes and directions. But yeah, it is certainly mysterious, and frankly, it's kind of a godsend for me.
Perfect answer. Perfect answer. Kris, how about you? What's one of these pieces of technology you rely on every day, but it's a mystery to you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to your point, when I saw this question, I was like, where does the list end? Really? I don't know how anything works. But what I really zeroed in on was my microwave because I spend a ton of time in the kitchen, love to cook, and I generally understand what's happening in the kitchen. I have a general understanding of how my stove works. Most
Hmm.
other things are fairly manual. But that microwave, man, I don't know. You put the food in, you boopity boop the boops, and then somehow irradiated warm cooked food comes out just moments later. It can take me an hour or 10 minutes in the microwave, and I don't really get that.
Yeah, another perfect answer. And as the host of a media podcast, I think I've got to give the most obvious answer and just think about how quickly my world would crumble without a television screen, without a computer screen. It's not something I could just magically recreate. I think of the story Station 11, where we've lost all of our technology. The premise of this question has come true. People no longer have access to stories. And we get this band of performers who are going around trying to put on plays, trying to recapture the stories from the past and keep them alive. Which brings me to my final question before we finally dig into this story. If we hit our Station 11 moment, the technology's gone. We're piecing it back together from scratch. We are left to our own devices. We're picking up the scraps of civilization. What role are you going to fall into to try to survive in this circumstance? Kris, what do you think? How are you going to get by, man?
I'm like a fairly crafty guy with some skills. And while I despise firearms, I don't dislike weapons. And I'm fairly handy with a bow and an arrow. I've got my archery set up in the basement right now. So I hope to be like the helps guy. You need a thing done, you make a thing, you lift a thing. Come see me. I think that I want to be very valuable to society. I want to be needed because I can do some stuff. I can make a thing. And like I said, I'm decent with a bladed weapon. So I hope to find my niche somewhere in there.
Absolutely. Neil, how are you going to survive this technological apocalypse?
You know what? I'll harken back to what you're saying about Station 11. I have developed an interest in playwriting over the few years. And if we don't have the immediate gratification of TV and cell phones and music and what have you, then we're going to need to entertain ourselves somehow. So I want to try to scribe some stories, about the past, and I'm going to need a willing, troop of actors to put those words into motion. And as long as there are actors out there, there are going to be some egos who want to get on stage and perform. And to my actor friends out there, I'm kidding. I love you. You're so much more than your egos. Just poking a little fun there. Any moment in time has to be marked by its stories. And I think I would really need that, just to keep going day to day.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. I think I'm in a similar boat. I could see myself wanting to be one of those performers. Maybe I'm the guy following the troupe around the country. I don't know if I'm going to make it. However, the only paths that I can really see from here, number one, if I can just be the person that organizes that information. I've got it on the ready. I'm keeping those records. I'm compiling things. I'm finding people. I'm trying to orchestrate that story. Or perhaps if I can find myself to a seat of power. I think I'm pretty good at diffusing a situation, smoothing over communications between people and seeing the sides of an issue. So maybe there's a future for me as some kind of an arbitrator, settler of disputes, hopefully managing to convince people that I am actually useful somewhere out there in the world.
A mediator / archivist.
There you go.
Randy the peacemaker. I like that.
Yeah.
It sounds like a dream. It truly does. All right. Well, we're not talking today about a civilization that's fallen, at least not in the traditional sense. We have got a short story that is set far in the future. Humanity has accessed outer space. We've got nations and civilizations across the stars. And that brings us to The Feeling of Power by Isaac Asimov. Hopefully if you're listening, you checked out the story, but just in case you love us that much, that you're willing to hear about this story from scratch, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis, and then I'm going to turn to Neil and Kris to see if there's anything that you think I got a little bit wrong, or if there are any themes or ideas or moments you really wanted to emphasize that maybe didn't come through in my synopsis. So here we go. The Terrestrial Federation is at war with the Deneb system, locked in a bitter stalemate. Neither side can make any headway because the automated weaponry on either side of the conflict is progressing at the same rate. Every offensive is neutralized by the enemy systems. One day, a simple, low-ranking technician, Myron Aub, catches the attention of his supervisor, senior programmer Schumann, when he figures out how to compute basic arithmetic in his head from studying quote-unquote ancient computers. Things quickly snowball from there. The government and military launch Project Number to mobilize this new science of graphitics toward the goal of designing manned missiles, because human lives are much more expendable than computers. Aub is given a fancy job title, but he is racked with guilt over the forces he has set in motion. In the end, he takes his own life. Schumann and the rest of Project Number are unmoved. Even during Aub's funeral, Schumann is thinking about the feeling of power he gets from harnessing numbers through this new system. All right, folks, that is the recap. Neil, anything that you want to smooth over or add to that before we move on?
I think you really nailed the recap, Randy. One thing that you really get from the story, as within, I think, any good dystopia, is a real sense of hierarchy here, which I think we'll get into. Relatively few characters, but real social segmentation here. But as far as the plot summary, yeah, I think you've captured it pretty much spot on.
All right, Kris, how about you? Any points of contention, clarification, or just friendly additions?
No, I think I agree with Neil that it's, again, just a spectacular synopsis from you, Randy. I think you nailed all the plot points really well. I did want to highlight that similar segmentation of society that came through. It's not in the main themes of technology, but one thing that stood out to me was the idea of the programmer. And Asimov goes out of his way to tell us how confident he feels in the face of these powerful men. He may not be a military man himself, right? He's not traditional strength and presence, but his value in this society is so great that he stands amongst these giants and feels totally in control and, if anything, superior. And in an ever-changing world where less and less is strength first and smarts hopefully are become more paramount, it stood out to me that he was already considering this changing dynamic back in 58.
Absolutely perfect. All right, folks, we've made it through the synopsis, so this is the point where we are finally going to explore this piece of literature.
Actually, Randy, if I could just stop you there.
What's up, Kris? What's happening?
Well, before we get into this great piece of literature, I thought I would exercise some of my newfound power as a co-host to slip a little segment in here. What do you think?
I absolutely love to hear it.
I'm really excited to challenge you both to sit back in a position of total safety myself as the question asker here.
Oh, dear.
But this story, as you mentioned, it deals with outdated technology. It deals with, we'll find out, arithmetic, right? Math. Aub's great talent as he can compute in his mind. And we're not as far removed from our schooling or from human-based arithmetic as the society in question. But I'm curious how well you, Randy, and you, Neil, now as adult men who have not been in school, probably haven't practiced basic arithmetic in a long time. How well do you hold up?
I can't speak for Neil, but I'm sweating already at the prospect of performing math live, but we're going to give it a whirl.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Amazing. Thank you for being game. Again, really excited to be the one asking the questions, not answering the questions. I've got 5 what I hope are basic arithmetic questions here for the two of you. The way we'll do this is I will put it out and you come to the answer as fast as you can and just shout it out. That can be done in your head. It can be done with pencil and paper. You just can't use a calculator or any other external computing technology. At the end, winner takes all the family pride. Well, here we go. First question coming at you hot. Tell me, what is 151 plus 24?
175?
That's correct, Randy. First points.
Hey!
To Randy, young and fresh.
Whew.
All right. Second question. Moving on from addition to the more challenging multiplication. Tell me, what is 4 times 20?
That would be 80.
Yeah, Neil. See, you're awake. You're awake. Here we go. It's tied 1-1, folks. After 2 questions, this is a hot race. Question number 3. We're moving on to division. What is 160 divided by 8?
That would be 20.
Neil, you came ready. Randy told me before we started that you were one of the smartest people he knows. And Randy is an English teacher, and so I think we may be a little imbalanced.
Yeah, my computer still had a few more processes to go through.
That's the humanities guy.
I think I was at least 5 more seconds away, if I'm being honest. So I love it.
It is right now 2-1. Neil has the chance to end it with this 4th and final question. Going back to addition and subtraction, we have a multi-function equation here. What is 15 plus 16 minus 3?
28?
Well done. Well done.
Did I get
Randy,
it?
you kept yourself alive, bud.
Whew. All right. Looks like I'm a little stronger on the addition subtraction. Good to know.
This is how I hoped it would go. We are all tied up heading into our 5th and final question. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. Tell me, Randy or Neil, what is 9 times 7?
Come on, Randy. I think we got to do it together. We got to break the rules and do it together because it's relevant.
I'm giving you this one, Neil, and then I'm going to tell you why.
You're going to give it to me?
And then I'm going to tell you why.
Okay. Well, that would be 63.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, and Randy's grace. Even though you're gracious, Randy, you still lose. That is how this still works. 3 out of 5 go to Neil. He's the winner. All the family pride, all the bragging rights are Neil's for life.
Oh, shucks.
Now, I'm going to tell you why that question fully broke me for a second, Kris and Neil. So at some point in elementary school, I was doing quite well in all of my subjects. And one of my teachers did mention to, I think, my mother that I seemed to be struggling a little bit with my basic multiplication tables. And Kris, you never got the chance to meet my father, but Neil's very close with my dad, and he loved to find like very practical solutions to things. But at this time, my family still had the Apple IIe computer. And my dad had taken some programming courses back in the 80s. And I honestly can't remember if this was a program he secured from somewhere or if this was something he partially programmed or what. I can't remember the details. But I had like a couple of years where I had all these benchmarks I had to hit for this little game where you were in the center of the screen and it was like a little rotating gun, and you had to shoot all these like incoming meteors with multiplication problems on them, and you had to do it quickly, and it basically worked. But the thought of having to do a basic multiplication question, some core memory of the pressure of that game that I had to hit all these multiplication benchmarks on just absolutely gave me a mental break there. And I just had to step aside and not even try to win that round of the game. So look at that, Kris. You unlocked a memory without even knowing that was where the segment was going to go.
No idea. Childhood's a funny thing, isn't it?
What a co-host. But I'm honored to lose to you, Neil, and I'm just glad it was not like a clean sweep. So I'm feeling good.
Nope, that was a World Series of math.
Absolutely. All right, folks. The premise of this show is we're going to take any piece of media and we're going to look at it as if it were a piece of great literature. The thing is, some of the literature we look at is already more or less considered great. Isaac Asimov is a great writer. This short story, it first appeared in If magazine in 1958, but you can find it today in any number of compilations out there in the world. It's pretty omnipresent and easy to find. So I guess today this is the segment where we look at a great piece of literature for what it is, just a great piece of literature. So let's dig into this thing. And I just want to start with our guest, Neil. Neil, you were kind enough to help us out. You dove in and read this Asimov story for the very first time. And I was just curious what your first impressions of this story were.
My first impressions of it were how effective it works, both as satire and also as hard science fiction, or as you said, literary science fiction. And I was surprised to find out that it was written in 1958 because it did remind me of some other works that came out later than that, which I think we'll get into later in the episode. So I was really struck by how ahead of its time it felt. But then, going back, understanding the early Cold War setting of Asimov's time, being 1958, it really made sense. But yeah, this piece really stands out as being both ahead of its time and sort of timeless as well. And yeah, again, it's short, it's to the point, it has well developed characters. I think you're right that sometimes it comes across as a little on the nose, but I think it packs a real punch. And yeah, good piece of fiction. Absolutely.
Kris, how about you? This was also your first experience with Asimov, apart from one fireside chat with a friend who was seeing the world through a certain lens. It left an impression. But what was your first impression of this Isaac Asimov story?
Yeah, I think that I'm with Neil in that it does get quite to the point. And on the nose is an okay way of describing it, and I don't see that as a negative thing. I think from the first paragraphs, it becomes apparent sort of where the story is going, and probably because we have the benefit of reading this from not quite a century later, but quite a ways down the road, and we've seen more stories like this and thought experiments like this explored. So perhaps that's why some of where it was going felt obvious to me. But I don't see that as a flaw in storytelling. When I can guess what a character is going to say next in television or movies, or if I can kind of see where a story might be going, I usually think that's a sign of good writing. It means they're building towards something organically and logically in a way that feels real to my lived experience. And so, yeah, the story was on the nose and quite to the point, but in a really good way. One bit of prescience that stood out to me was this reference to pocket computers.
Hmm.
Now, like a personal computer wasn't even a thing that we could really consider in 1958. So I don't think that Isaac Asimov was imagining the iPhone that I now carry. But what else would you describe it as other than a pocket computer? Right? And I can picture the generals of today in their boardroom just pulling out their little pocket computer to test whatever theory is being put forth or whatever fact was just shared. And so he certainly had a pretty good idea of where we were all heading. And this is at a time when computers were barely even a thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Kris. I can't be fully honest about this memory because I don't remember. But I can only guess that even back in 2006, when I had a fairly basic cell phone, I would imagine when I read pocket computers, I have a feeling I might have even been picturing like a graphing calculator or something more so than the smartphone that obviously jumps to mind in the present.
You were picturing the TI-83.
I think I might have been. Things change quickly.
It's certainly something to consider what he might have been picturing, considering what we do have today. Well, I'll take us forward from there then. Neil, I'll come back to you. Does this story share any connective tissue? You kind of hinted before that it feels like something maybe that was written a little bit later, but are there any pieces of media that this really feels connected to or influenced by? Or an influence of, rather?
Influence of, I'd say definitely. I got a couple of vibes having read this kind of right away. One was a little bit of Vonnegut because I remember, Randy, you talked about, the short stories that you read in school. And I always remember the Vonnegut story, Harrison Bergeron,
Mm-hmm.
which is about a future, certainly dystopian society where everyone is forced to be equal. So when a particularly smart person has the opportunity to use their intellect, the government stifles it by implementing some sort of tremendous mental handicap. And I remember in that story that people who were really brainy would have to wear radios that would produce loud noises to distract them and cause headaches. And then people with great physical strength would, similarly be burdened. So you really get that same feeling of segmentation. In the Vonnegut story, it's obviously forced, but reading behind, kind of between the lines in the Asimov story, I really get the impression that freedom is certainly not extended to the public in the world of the feeling of power. So there was that similarity, and then I really got a Doctor Strangelove vibe
Mm-hmm.
in this story. Um, I couldn't help but imagining if I imagine Stanley Kubrick must have been immensely well read, and I can only
Mm-hmm.
imagine that he encountered this story at some point because you're literally talking about manned missiles, and in Doctor Strangelove, the movie ends with the most literal depiction of a manned missile that could ever be filmed. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and also I don't think this was George Lucas's intent at all, but we're talking about in the Asimov story a war with the citizens of Deneb, which is a star. So
Mm-hmm.
literally have Star Wars here. So that was just kind of a fun. But yeah, there was definitely some Asimov ESP going on in terms of what would come down in the future.
I dig that. I dig that. You are super smart, man. Randy, what about you?
Yeah, I've got a couple things that come to mind. One of them is also good old Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. I'm feeling it for some of the same reasons as Neil, but I actually wanted to talk even more about the overall tone. As we keep saying, I accuse the story of, if it has any flaws, it's a little bit on the nose. It's a little bit obvious. Obviously, I still love the story. I'm doing a whole podcast about it. But even though it is on the nose, there is that sense of humor and irreverence coming through here in a couple of moments, especially pertaining to the General Weeder character. He's got a little bit of Doctor Strangelove, Jack Ripper. I am going to deliver this full monologue with a giant cigar hanging out of my mouth sort of energy, right? So a couple quotes that really stood out to me is in the opening sequence, when Weeder is checking Aub's work. There's this line where it says, he took out his own computer, and then in parentheses, it says, a severely styled GI model, and struck it at random. I just loved I love that description that he's got like the military grade personal computer. Like it's gotta evoke his manliness, his toughness. And I got such a kick out of that. Um, there's a similar line later in the story when, he's taken over Project Number. This is General Weeder again. And the line is, the general was overall head, and he so considered himself at every waking moment. That he's just got that vibe, that energy, that superiority. Um, yeah, and it's a ton of fun. It's definitely got that energy. This is more of a thematic cheat, but this also brought me to one of my favorite shows of the last 5 years, which is Mythic Quest, the Rob McElhenney vehicle, and I think it's because Neil, you mentioned Vonnegut writing some similar stuff with a similar vibe at the same time. F. Murray Abraham of Amadeus fame was on the first two seasons of the show Mythic Quest, playing this washed up science fiction writer who's just kind of decaying on the staff of this massively multiplayer online game, writing story for bad video game plot lines and things like that. In season 2, we get a one-off episode that's that's a backstory for his character. The title of the episode is literally "Backstory" with an exclamation point. So we've got a younger actor playing this F. Murray Abraham character, working for one of these sci-fi magazines. They've rejected his stories; they're not very good. but the grammar is sound and well structured. So they're hiring him to read these stories, which leads to a chance meeting with Isaac Asimov himself, who comments on this character's story. Basically leaves him some notes about how there were a couple of good ideas in there, but it was pretty bad, and pretty much rewrites the story for him. And then you find out that the origin story for this character is his only real successful work was actually written by Isaac Asimov. And he's not been able to recreate it since then. He's trying to evoke and recreate this style over time. So to see these master works that someone like me eats up, your Isaac Asimov, your Kurt Vonnegut, and to think of a world where people are trying to imitate it and not always doing it well, that also really comes to mind here. Kris, how about for you? You have any literary connections?
Yeah, I think initially, I think thematically, this just first and foremost reminded me of 1984. Anytime I read dystopian, first place I go, because that was that first real iconic dystopian novel that I read in high school. In that way, it also was reminding me of, have you ever seen, what is the name? I thought I wasn't going to be able to think of it, but I did. Equilibrium. Did you ever see that flick? It's a Christian Bale movie. Taye Diggs is in it.
Oh, wow. Tell me more.
Sean Bean is in it.
Okay. I'm listening.
None of the plot points really fall in line with this story, but it's just another dystopian society where authority rules. Society has fallen to a place that's quite segmented, and the average person isn't very, very powerful. But another story that this brought to mind for me was Flowers for Algernon. I assume you guys have read the story at some point in your illustrious education. Something about Aub. I just found him to be such a sympathetic character from the jump. Asimov does a great job of writing him as nervous, even though he is succeeding. He has this great title. He doesn't feel at all equal with the people he's working alongside of. He still feels totally less than, given his background. And so he reminded me simultaneously of Charlie and of Algernon. Just like a poor victim in systems and machinations much larger than himself. Even though he kind of came into this on his own, it was his own little hobby. It's not like he was like initially manipulated. He feels like a victim in the story, not just long before he chooses to take his own life. He certainly feels like a victim.
Kris, I absolutely love what you have to say about our guy Aub and his guilt, and just this sort of sadness that he almost doesn't see any value in himself, even though he's done this really phenomenal, impressive thing that reshapes the way everyone else sees the world. And doesn't always feel like there's a lot of room for the little guy here, right? Neil and I both brought up Dr. Strangelove, a story that was based on like a thriller novel that Stanley Kubrick wanted to retell as a comedy, because you couldn't talk about something as dark as the Cold War and the threat of the destruction of the world without doing it in a satirical and humorous way. There's a little bit of that in this story. And when Asimov wrote this, he was most likely, influenced by that Cold War environment, these systems of deterrence. The thing that escalates the plot in Doctor Strangelove when it looks like we're going to get a resolution is the revelation of the concept of a doomsday device that is programmed to trigger if anyone drops a nuke. And there is no way to untrigger it. There is no way to stop it from happening. It is now fully automated. The decision has been made and it is out of our hands. That's a pretty dark existential question. Did the existential weight of the Cold War and what it means to give into automated systems hit you while you were reading this story or upon reflection? Kris, I'll go to you first on this one.
So it wasn't that particular vein of existential dread that sank in for me. I think what I was most disturbed by was by the end, as they saw in their minds, the logical extension of this kind of technology being the ultimate removal of computers from weapon systems and the introduction of humans instead, right? Manned missiles. And just the idea of those powers sitting in that room, talking about the people they will ultimately send to die for their own objectives and goals was really haunting to me because it's a reality we live with every single day. It's a reality we have lived with for as long as there have been powers and wars to fight. And it's not a reality I see changing in our world anytime soon. So I think that for me was what was most haunting. The idea that we're kind of always, as a society, at the mercy of these powers that are working in the background and don't think much of us as individuals, but rather as perhaps literal cannon fodder.
Absolutely. Neil, how about you?
I think what really hit me was sort of the theme of de-evolution or devolution,
Mm,
because we're involved with a society in which people are literally forgetting technology. And then you have some people who have the ability to actually to learn the basics of mathematics. And it's seen as a wondrous thing.
mm.
However, where the story goes in a relatively short time is that that new knowledge is immediately appropriated for the sake of making warfare. So that's what kind of punched me in the gut there. In an odd kind of way, I thought of the movie Wall-E, where you have all the people who have become extremely out of shape and
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
just don't know everything and they're completely reliant on machines for their survival. And in this case, it's almost like you have a few people who are able to buck that trend, but their ability is immediately stolen for the purpose of, violently defeating an enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did have just a quick follow-up question to that, missiles and weapons and Cold War aside. The other existential issue that comes to mind for me today reading this story that I wasn't thinking about so much back in 2006, 2007, is just the question of artificial intelligence. I don't want to go too far down this wormhole. There are plenty of tech podcasts and writers and thinkers out there who can speak to this much more articulately than perhaps the three of us can. But I was just curious if you guys have any sort of broad thoughts about a world where, especially in the last year and a half, not only are we seeing different types of artificial intelligence technology hit the mainstream, but they very quickly and aggressively become a big part of how companies advertise new products. I'm starting to get sick of seeing the phrase powered by AI, whether or not that's a good or bad thing. Um, so Kris, I'll go to you first. Do you have any thoughts on artificial intelligence or, did you find yourself reflecting on this development as you were reading the story?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that we understand the world they're in now. Humans have probably become obsolete in a number of fields, right? Computers have become so advanced, given the kind of devolution that is described. I can only imagine how very automated their whole world is, and so it was certainly top of mind. And I think for me, in my world, most relevantly, AI really freaks me out when it comes to performance art, right? Creatives, artists looking to continue to do that in a relevant, necessary way in the world, and really scary. I think you mentioned I'm a voice actor, and so I'll get invites from various platforms to submit my voice for jobs. It's disturbing how frequently I'm invited to read
Hmm.
just any number of words so that my voice can be captured for the sake of developing AI technology. And I can't help but think when I get those invites is that like they're inviting me to make myself obsolete. Please come give us your voice, then we can develop a program that'll make it so that you don't need to do this anymore. So yeah, it was certainly top of mind for me.
Neil, how about you? Any thoughts on your experience with AI and whether or not those gears were turning in your head when you read this story?
I think so, Randy. I certainly echo what Kris said. I mean, yeah, it's AI so quickly has become both really amazing and awe-inspiring and also can be really scary and intrusive. Just in my own experience, as the production team and director and myself have, worked to bring the play I wrote, to life, there was some discussion about, whether to use AI for some of the promotional materials. And just sort of echoing what Kris said about, his own career, we made the decision, not to do that. I won't get too far into that because, you know, that's that's a discussion that we could spend days on. What I found interesting in the story was, number one, that Asimov was even introducing the concept of AI going back as far as 1958. I really would not have expected that. So that's him really being, again, ahead of his time. But what's kind of darkly humorous is that as the story progresses and as Aub reveals his talent, which is then picked up by some of the other characters in the story, we're getting away from artificial intelligence and we're going to actual human intelligence. But however, it immediately, as I said before, it's appropriated for violent purposes. So that's kind of chilling. That's certainly an outlook that would just come across as incredibly pessimistic if the story didn't have that vein of humor running through it. So yeah, by sort of turning AI on its ear, it did bring those themes of, the controversy of AI to life.
Yeah, I felt really similar to both of you guys, and I think the moment early in the story that got me thinking AI was when we meet programmer Schumann, and his job is described in the following way. It says he originates programming patterns. Perhaps I should have secured a programmer as a guest for this show to give me their insights into this. The person in my life I know who is the most gung ho about possible positive things having to do with AI is someone who does a lot of coding. There's something there. And at least this English teachery layperson's perspective of what Schumann's job was is I was like, is he just kind of like interacting with an AI interface? Like he's asking it to do some things and produce results and calculate something. And like is that the art form, right? Because I don't get the sense he's actually in there manipulating code. I could be getting this wrong. But that's at least my 2024 readings kind of perspective. Like what is his relationship? I don't think we need to get rid of all assistive technology, right? Like it's great that I can access a program and I can design a web page for myself and I don't have to click a little AI button, but a lot of the tricks of the trade are there and I can apply maybe some other insight I have into design and decision making to make it my own. But it becomes this tough to define line. I've explored some of these different AI technologies, partly out of curiosity, partly to try to figure out how to regulate those things in the classroom as a teacher when I know that my students can access them and have used them at different points in time. And I think I had like a little bump of seeing some fun possibilities and there may be some positive applications, but there are diminishing returns there. And I think my attitude has gotten emptier and emptier, and I've leaned less and less towards wanting to feed that machine. And then, of course, we had our writers and actors strikes, and artificial intelligence was one of the central issues in those negotiations. I listened to some podcasts over at The Ringer, and they've been on social media publicizing some details of their negotiations. And one of the things they are fighting over is that the Ringer would like to use AI to reproduce the podcast hosts' voices in other languages for further distribution, rather than hiring a native speaker of a language to recreate something or translate something. And I just keep thinking of new problems as much or more as I think of new solutions and applications. And yeah, eventually it's going to come down to some kind of military science. We've been talking really about how we contextualize this story. Kris, do you want to take us in a more literary direction?
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear more from Neil about anything in the story that stood out to you as far as favorite moments when you were reading. Any hero quotes images or moments that really worked for you?
I'm just Randy really made me think of the characterization of Schumann because it's humorous in kind of a cynical way. He really doesn't seem to have any skills other than being a good schmoozer and sort of a PR man between the military and the government and whoever else happens to be in the room, which in this case is Aub, who is clearly seen as this very lowly technician. And that really grabbed me early on was the fact that this high powered person who just he seems to really love to work the room, but that really seems all he's capable of. And that really does ultimately pay off in the final line of the story, which I won't spoil just yet. So I had that characterization as something that really just was very sneakily powerful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that really struck me as just good characterization and really good use of irony.
Yeah, I dig it. I think that first scene in the boardroom or a war room, wherever they are with Ob is powerful. What about you, Randy?
I've got a couple of options here. I'm gonna just give you one for now, and I'll cycle back to the other one later at some point, I'm sure. But I'm just gonna go with a line you mentioned earlier, Kris, in a slightly different context. But this is Schumann. He's trying to schmooze, the head of some kind of industry head, and trying to get them in on project number, bring their machines in perspective. And he's trying to sell this very quote unquote conservative business person on the idea. And what Schumann says is communications devices become less massive and more efficient constantly. For that matter, compare your pocket computer with the massive jobs of 1,000 years ago. Why not, then, the last step of doing away with computers altogether? Now, I love this for a lot of reasons. It's partly because it's a little bit of a snarky sort of maybe we don't need these computers at all kind of moment. And to see Schumann almost stumble into that. But I also got a little chuckle out of it because I feel like I lived through watching this. I'm thinking back to the version of me who did not want a cell phone. And I'm thinking of a bit in one of my favorite dumb comedies of all time, which is Zoolander. And there's a bit in Zoolander where like the very trendy male models in the movie, including Derek Zoolander, have these absurdly tiny cell phones. Like I'm pretty sure Ben Stiller pulls out the cell phone and uses like just four fingers to like open it up, and he's like balancing it on a finger, and it's this real funny bit that felt like a 2001 take on this joke. Like, oh yeah, it's getting smaller and smaller to the point that it's impractical, and it's a joke. But it also reminds me that they kind of got that wrong too, right? Because it becomes more than a phone. We make the shift to smartphones, and the whole size and design changes, and we need a screen. So it reminded me of a flaw in Schumann's logic here. And just this reminder that there's always going to be a new shift into the technology that we didn't foresee. I mean, I've been reading and watching sci-fi about artificial intelligence my entire life, and it wasn't until really the last year and a half that it hit the mainstream in a real practical way where it's there, available to almost everyone. And it doesn't look quite like I thought it would, from reading all that science, but I still feel like it prepared me.
That's really, really great points there. And I think it's hysterical that Zoolander came to mind for you because it came to mind for me too. Not the exact same context, but our characters in the story have so little understanding of how computers work, like to the point where they don't realize that math is even something that a human could do. They have no idea how the computers do.
Kris, the files are in the computer?
Tell me you weren't thinking of that as you're reading this, right? These folks are doing their war games, and the technology is a huge part of their lives, but they've got the files may as well be in the computer as far as they're concerned, right? I think for me, my favorite scene encompasses it's closer to Randy's answer. In that first boardroom, I was really interested in the way Asimov wanted to establish the power dynamics, right? I think I hinted earlier that's on display where the programmer, whatever it is, he's clearly an intellectual. He's an intellectual. He's a civilian. He's not a military man. He's not a man of might and strength. And not only is it clear how comfortable he is in the room, but there's this line from the general there. He's really upset with all this childish mystery, or this air of mystery he finds like really childish, and you can tell it's bothering him. And it's because he's a strong man who's used to being able to control things from his place of authority and his strength. And he's on his back foot in this room, and he's at the mercy of this programmer guy. And it's probably clear that this programmer guy is enjoying this whole little dog and pony show. This chance to roll out this enticing bit of information to these dummies that he comes in and reports to. And so that power dynamic was so beautifully on display. And I think that first scene really is all the character work. Everything from after there is kind of plot driven. Then this happens and this happens. And these are the dominoes falling from this first moment in this first room until it all finally culminates in that last line that you mentioned, Neil. And I will spoil it. I'm not sorry. It says 9 times 7, thought Schumann with deep satisfaction, is 63. And I don't need a computer to tell me so. The computer is in my own head. And it was amazing, the feeling of power that gave him. He's already a person who clearly enjoys power and the power that comes from his mind. And it's ultimately culminated right there for us perfectly in that last quote. So I really enjoyed that.
Absolutely. One just little point I missed the first time around about Schumann is that eventually towards the end of the story is that he's referred to as Dr. Schumann. And I couldn't help but thinking, a doctor of what? Because again, he knows how to work a room. He's a good PR man. He's a good schmoozer, but apparently that was good for a PhD in this world.
Dr. Bullshit.
Yeah.
Neil, you were just kind of on a roll capturing something about this Schumann guy getting all this sway out of being a BSer. Do you think this environment is part of what brought Aub to the place he finds himself at the end of the story?
I think so, Randy, because I don't think there's any future for Aub other than to be a human automaton who can use his mathematical ability just in furtherance of what is ultimately war and violence. So he's really taken advantage of here, and I can only see him being just put to use as a slave who can do computations in his head. Ironically, highlighting the fact that everyone else in power has lost the ability to do so. Until, of course, at the very end, when, as Kris explains very well, Schumann, our PR man, our ad man, our BSer, realizes that he can harness that power as well. In short, there's no happy ending for Aub here.
Yeah, what do you think, Kris? Do you think these messed up dynamics are, in addition to the violence of the manned missiles, did any of these other dynamics bring Aub to this end?
Yeah, I think so, unfortunately. To take one's own life is no small decision, no matter what you've faced, right? It's a really difficult decision to come to be determined to do that. You have to be really hopeless and seemingly helpless. And I'm sure that his place in society lent to both of those feelings of being totally hopeless, that he could do anything to stop this process that he has inadvertently begun, right? He's totally helpless now in this world, and he's going to be guilty of so many horrors going forward by way of just this simple little hobby that he once had. And I think maybe if either these power structures weren't so solidly ingrained in their society, or if he had a different position within that power dynamic, perhaps he wouldn't have been so hopeless. Maybe he would have felt that he had more of a voice in how these skills would be used and how this technology, I'll put in quotes because we're talking about people using their brains, how this would go forward. Maybe he wouldn't have taken his own life, but I think in the face of his own helplessness in society, he was hopeless.
Yeah, absolutely. And like this world where we're making it is being, as Neil so wisely put it, being a schmoozer like Schumann. Almost anyone could look at the community they live in, the job that they work at, and see a lot of powerful people being the folks who can schmooze and mobilize other people to their end. I don't even have to take a political stance on anything to say that, people in the United States of America, for instance, have differing politics, but I think one thing they share is the feeling that they're being schmoozed and lied to and manipulated. We're not all going to agree on who's the most guilty. But I do think that's a pattern that, like, even when you get to the top, it's just a game. And before Aub makes his choice, this was my other candidate for a favorite line, but it's relevant here. He was no longer a technician, of course, having been relieved of his duties and assigned to the project with a fine sounding title and good pay. But of course, the social distinction remained, and the highly placed scientific leaders could never bring themselves to admit him to their ranks on a footing of equality, nor, to do Aub justice, did he himself wish it. He was as uncomfortable with them as they with him. I love that line. It resonates with me deeply because, there are certain circles that I think I would be absolutely miserable in if I suddenly had to wheel and deal and associate with a certain type of person with a certain set of values. And for him to kind of fallen into this position that's miserable and he's not even accepted, partly because he's genuinely curious. He says, I thought I discovered this cool mind exercise. And now it's become a weapon. That's really upsetting. These great men who you thought could do great things with your discovery, they don't really see the beauty of it.
And actually, Randy, as just a sort of sidebar to that, can we just turn to his actual death scene, which is line, because it's kind of darkly humorous how terse it is, and it follows. He then deliberately turned the focus of a protein depolarizer on himself and fell instantly and painlessly dead. And that's it. So you take the contrast of the rather wordy description that you shared about his new place in life compared to his death, which is very quick. And what I found kind of creepy is how quickly he was able to do this. So you have the term protein depolarizer, which is a pretty good sci-fi concoction right up there with set phaser on stun. But I'm also wondering, why does he have this thing? And does everybody have it in case they just decide they need to check out? So, because again, he's a guy who he's learned how to do math. He's certainly not somebody who would, create insta-kill weapons. So the fact that he just had this on him, there's no indication that it's, stolen. That's pretty darn dark.
Yes, sucks. Poor guy.
Maybe when you join Project Number, you get issued one of those cool military computers and your, standard issue protein depolarizer, is part of the look.
Right.
Yeah, I love that angle. I love some good subtext.
Yeah. In a much friendlier world, he would just have one of those mind erasers that they use in Men in Black.
Well, we talked a bit about the power dynamic at play in the story, so I'm curious if either of you have personal experience like this. Randy, have you ever felt, I don't know, a feeling of power? Hopefully not, while masterminding a deadly technological advancement?
Yeah, Kris, just bear with me for a second. I'm just unpacking my soapbox away. I think I've made my broad sweeping statements about humanity for the day. I'm just gonna go with something kind of silly. Listen, Kris, you mentioned you're kind of handy. I'm not a handy person. I'm terrified to fix something. I'm terrified to take something apart. I see all the things that can go wrong, even though I know how much I would benefit. That being said, and in the rare moments where I've pushed past my fears and taken something on by myself, sometimes I've felt this feeling of power. And, I'd say probably 5 or 6 years ago, something went wrong with the toilet. And this was in my old house where we had only one bathroom. And, the water would not stop running. It was no longer stopping. I had to shut the water off. We could not, consistently and easily use the toilet. So it was like late in the evening, and I finally said okay, and I went out uh, to the hardware store, and I bought like a whole new set of interior pieces for the flushing mechanism for the toilet. Now, for handy folks out there, I know you're thinking, Randy, this is a pretty simple repair, man. But for me, it was terrifying. I was imagining that I was going to flood the entire house. Everything was going to go wrong. But I went through the steps, replaced everything, and I noticed that it worked. And I think I had like a series of buckets that I kept set up for like a week because I was sure that my work would fail. And then a couple weeks later, I realized that no, I in fact just fixed the problem, more or less on my own, and it felt incredible. It was that reminder that maybe not everything has to be a mystery. So it's given me a tiny bit more confidence to maybe take on a challenge or two on my own.
Handy Randy, give yourself some credit, man. Toilet fix is a good fix.
Thank you, thank you.
What about you, Neil?
I'm going to cheat a little bit and just continue from what Randy said. A few years ago, I had an issue with my car where the vent that, dispensed air, whether through the heater or the air conditioner, it wasn't working. So I basically had two two settings. One was off and the other was monsoon in your face, just full blast. And so I did some research on it, and it turned out that I needed to replace something called the blower motor resistor, which basically controls the settings on your vent. So if you want a gentle source of heat or air conditioning, then you can do that. If you want to turn it up full blast, you can. So I did the research on that. I went to the auto parts store and I installed this thing. To do this, I had to remove some panels underneath the driver's side of the car, and I had to get into the most uncomfortable position I've ever been in my life. It was like doing extreme yoga because this thing was installed so deeply underneath the passenger seat. I had to contort myself like never before, and I really did have aches and pains. But after finally fiddling a lot and getting this thing installed, I once again had a comfortable car. Several years ago, I did battle with the vent system for a 2001 Camry, and I legitimately felt proud and capable having done that. A little bit of braggadocio followed. So, yes, absolutely. For being a non handy person, doing a minorly handy thing, feeling of
Hmm.
power all the way.
That is awesome. Um, I am a handy guy. My dad's a carpenter by trade, so I kind of grew up in and around tools, and I've got a decent like I can change the oil in the car and that kind of good stuff. So I don't have a good story that falls in that vein. But we did get stuck once. So my feeling of power is much more just like raw and visceral, but similarly triumphant. Um, my wife and I were on vacation in Vermont. We do like a winter trip. We used to be retail workers, the two of us. So we have a super long season through the holidays. And then we would take our time off like in February. And usually we would go looking for deep winter somewhere. And so this year we had gone to Vermont, and we were driving up a hill in the snow and the ice. We were looking at these beautiful green rocks cut out of a local quarry there. And my wife pulled her RAV4 over, and the nose of the vehicle went down into a little divot. And we went to back out, and the car didn't move, and we couldn't back out. And I thought we were going to be stuck in the middle of nowhere, Vermont.
Mm.
We had cell phones. It was the modern day, but we were not near stuff. So even to get a hold of somebody would have meant being out there in that cold, or sitting in the car running the battery for however long. I somehow managed to get us out, but this involved me like planting my feet on the rocks that were in front of the hood of the car, and then putting my hands on the hood. And while she put it in reverse, I just like pressed with my legs, pressed with my hands, and somehow 5 or so minutes later, that vehicle was out of the ditch, up on the side of the road. And I mean, I felt pretty good about it personally, but my wife made me feel like $1,000,000. She made me feel like I had picked the thing up over my head and just carried it to the road and set it down. the amount of like, I can't believe that just happened praise that I got is something I've carried with me, and I will bring up once in a while when I need an ego boost, even today, because it was a good moment.
Kris, instead of telling that whole story, you could have just called us nerds.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
No, I hope it's clear that I'm joking.
Yeah.
It's truly an incredible story. I think I'm just jealous of it. It was a great one. Thank you so much for sharing it. Folks, before I close this out with the last question, do you guys have any other thoughts or feelings you want to share about the feeling of power?
Yeah, I wish I lied and made up fixing a toaster once.
I wish I had lied and said that, I successfully wrestled a grizzly bear or something like that. Or as Kris calls it, Thursday.
Thursday.
You know. So, Neil, you've read an Asimov story now. Uh, do you think you'll ever pick up another Asimov story in the future?
It really feels a lot more likely now. I mean, this was really well written. Good characterization, some real gut punch moments, and you know, really good world building. Sometimes I'm a little reluctant to kind of go back and read something in the past,
Mm-hmm.
or I should say written in the past. But reading this, I never would have guessed that this came from the 50s, even though in retrospect, that does seem appropriate. But I would say that, I mean, he's could easily be considered a good 15, 20 years ahead of his time with this story. So I really am tempted to go back and maybe look at the Foundation series, or at least some of his other shorter works first, because yeah, this was really well done.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Kris, will Isaac Asimov be in your future?
I mean, yeah, once I knew that he had written a trilogy of any kind. I'm just a sucker for trilogies, so give me Foundation
Mm-hmm.
all day. But probably more immediately, I think I will pick up the Nightfall novel. He took that initial short story, continued to expand upon the lore there, and put together a full novel. And that might be my next crack at some Asimov.
That's awesome. I've got to confess, I've not watched the Foundation series, but I know it has some really rabid fans. I know folks absolutely love it. My understanding is they've made some changes from the original Asimov story, but that this has definitely inspired me to maybe move that up my list of shows to watch. Now, if you are out there and still listening to us and you are thinking, why did I listen to three folks who've read like one Asimov story talk to me about Isaac Asimov? Why am I listening to these newbies? If that's the way you're feeling, I just want to throw a quick recommendation out there to you. A fellow member of Kris and I's beloved podcast community, Lozy, has an entire Isaac Asimov podcast. It's called the Asimov Cast, and you should definitely consider checking it out. He has some really great guests on there. Before we close out for today, I just want to take us back yet another 100 years, in fact, more than 100 years from where we met Isaac Asimov in 1958, and just remind everyone that these thoughts have been in our mind forever. I pulled a little quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance. I've cut it down. I've got a few ellipses in here to keep things simple. But this was so relevant to our conversation today. I just wanted to share it with you. All men plume themselves on the improvement of society, and no man improves. Society never advances. It recedes as fast on one side as it gains on the other. It undergoes continual changes. The civilized man has built a coach, but has lost the use of his feet. He is supported on crutches, but lacks so much support of muscle. He has a fine Geneva watch, but he fails of the skill to tell the hour by the sun.
Absolutely. Excellent footnote to what we've discussed tonight.
Yeah, we're advancing and falling back, and hopefully we can find that balance. It's been a long night talking about a short story, but it's because you two guys are just so fascinating and wonderful to chat with. So thank you so much for this. First and foremost, Neil, you are my beloved cousin, another one of my beloved podcasting folks. thank you so much for joining us and making this a special night, giving Kris and I a chance to talk to someone new and just bringing all sorts of incredible insights. And Kris, thank you as always for being an incredible co-host. So before we go, I'm just going to give everyone a chance to talk about any social media that they want to share, or any projects that you might have going on. Neil, if you are in fact interested in people finding you on social media, is there anywhere folks can look you up? If not, do you have any projects or things going on that people can look out for?
Well, I really don't have that social media presence, at least not yet. Maybe one of my cousins could help me with that one of these days. I do have a project coming up that I am pretty proud of. It's on a pretty limited scale geographically, but if at the end of March you happen to find yourself in Indianapolis, I do have a play coming out. It's called Herding Cats. It is my first full-length play, and it's going to debut courtesy of Theater Unchained. So if you are at all interested in just checking it out for the fun of it, that's at theaterunchained.org. I am over the moon to finally have the opportunity to experience that live and in person. And, we've got a great crew and director, so I'm just really psyched for that. And thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm really excited, Neil. I know I was lucky enough to check out an advanced copy of that script once upon a time. So I'm really happy for you. I love your style. It's so fun and insightful to the whole human condition.
Thank you.
Kris, where can folks find you? And do you have anything going on you feel like sharing tonight?
No, nothing new to share right now. But as ever, you can find me on the Instagram at Kris_Ingersoll. It's Kris like Kringle. I think I say that every time, but it is Kris with a K. And so you'll find me there on Instagram, nowhere else.
Absolutely. And as for me, Randy Elaine, you can find me on Twitter at Mr_Elaine, ALLAIN. I've got a bunch of links there to all the other places you can find me as well. I also hope you'll check out every pod you cast over on the Pop Break Today podcast feed. I podcast with a couple of great guys, Justin and Kris Mancini over there, and we are working our way through the entire discography of The Police. You can also find some of my writing on the Pop Break. Most recently, I've been working on a series of stories to help people get pumped up for these new episodes of Bluey dropping in April. So expect to hear more from me on that front. All right. Thanks for joining us for Media Lit, and we look forward to seeing you next time.